The night Joanna Reeves turned 32, her husband forgot entirely. Not the way people forget small things, a grocery item, a name, a passing obligation. He forgot the way people forget things that never mattered to them in the first place. She had come home from her shift at the hospital to find the apartment dark, the kitchen cold, and a sticky note on the refrigerator that said "back late. Don't wait up." Below that, in the same casual scrawl he used for grocery lists, "Happy birthday" or whatever. She stood in the kitchen for a long time with her coat still on, reading those 3 words until they blurred. Joanna had been a pediatric nurse for 7 years. She knew how to hold a child through a blood draw without flinching. She knew how to deliver terrible news with a steady voice. She had learned, over time, to keep the soft parts of herself tucked somewhere safe where the hard days couldn't reach them. But standing in that kitchen with the refrigerator hum as her only company, something she had been protecting for a very long time finally gave. She set her bag on the counter and called her mother. Her mother, Celeste, lived 40 minutes north in a 2-bedroom rental that smelled like lavender and old paperbacks. She had been battling early-stage Parkinson's for 2 years now, navigating the tremors and the fear and the medication adjustments with a grace that Joanna found both inspiring and heartbreaking. It was Celeste who had pushed Joanna through nursing school. Celeste who had driven 4 hours to be in the front row when she pinned her badge for the first time. Celeste who still sent birthday cards in the mail, always arriving exactly on time, always with handwriting that trembled a little more each year. The card had arrived that morning. Joanna had read it 3 times on her lunch break. Her mother picked up on the second ring. "You sound hollow," Celeste said before Joanna had said anything at all. "Tell me," she told her. Not everything. She had been editing the story of her marriage for Celeste's benefit for so long that the abridged version came naturally. But enough. Enough that by the end, her mother was quiet for a moment, then said with a gentleness that cracked something open, "You have been trying to carry water in a bucket with no bottom, sweetheart. At some point, you have to set it down." After she hung up, Joanna packed a bag. Not frantically, not in the dramatic way she had always assumed she would leave, if as slowly. Deliberately. She chose things that were hers before he was ever part of her life. Her grandmother's cardigan. The running shoes she had bought with her first real paycheck. A photograph of herself and Celeste taken the summer before nursing school. Both of them squinting into the sun outside a diner, somewhere in New Hampshire. She wrote a note of her own. It was 3 sentences. She left it on the kitchen counter and walked out. The evening air outside their building was sharp with the edge of late October. Chicago in autumn had a particular quality of light, amber and melancholy, the kind that made everything look like it was already being remembered. Joanna walked without direction, her bag over one shoulder, her breath making small clouds in the cold. She ended up in a coffee shop on Wabash, one of those narrow spots wedged between 2 larger buildings. The kind that filled up at 7 a.m. with construction workers and emptied out by 9. At 9 in the evening it was nearly deserted. An older man dozed over a newspaper in the back corner. A barista with a nose ring wiped down the espresso machine with the dedication of someone who took small things seriously. Joanna ordered a black coffee and sat at the window and thought about her life with the careful attention she had never allowed herself while living it. She was 32 years old. She had a mother who needed her. She had a marriage that had become an obligation she could no longer afford to keep paying. She had 7 years of experience in pediatric nursing, a skill set she was proud of, and a savings account that reflected the fact that her husband had never once asked about her financial goals, which meant she had been quietly building one alone. She was not starting from somewhere. That was different. Her phone buzzed on the table. "Derek. Where are you? The Holloways are coming over tomorrow. We need to talk about." She turned the phone face down. It buzzed again, 20 minutes later. A number she didn't recognize, a Chicago area code. She almost didn't answer. The voice was male, measured, accented in a way she couldn't immediately place. Something European, but polished smooth by years of American English layered over it. "Yes," she said cautiously. "Who is this?" "My name is Aldrich Sterling. I apologize for the hour." A pause. "I was given your number by Celeste. I hope that is not alarming." She sat up straighter. "My mother gave you a number?" "She did, yes. With some hesitation, I should say. She is protective of you, which I respect entirely." Another pause, more deliberate this time. "I understand this is an unusual circumstance. I would not have called if I did not believe it was important." Joanna pressed her fingers around the warm side of her coffee mug. "How do you know my mother?" "I have been her employer for the past 18 months, he said. "She does needlework consulting for my household's restoration projects. She has exceptional eye for historical accuracy. I believe she mentioned it to you as freelance work." She had. Joanna had thought it was some small local project, something to keep her mother's hands busy. She had not asked enough questions. She was beginning to realize she had not asked enough questions about several things. "Mr. Sterling," she said, "it's almost 10 o'clock. I know. I'm sorry." And he did sound sorry, in the way that people who are unaccustomed to apology sound when they mean one. "Your mother called me tonight. She was worried about you. She asked if there was anything I could do to help." A beat of silence. "I am in a position to offer you something, Miss Reeves, if you're willing to hear it. Not over the phone, but I can have someone bring you here if you'd prefer somewhere safer than wherever you are right now." "What makes you think I'm somewhere unsafe?" "The background noise," he said. "A coffee shop, late at night, with a bag, I would guess. Given what your mother told me." He did not say it unkindly. "I am not prying. I am simply paying attention." Joanna looked out the window at the Wabash streetlights cutting orange shapes across the wet pavement. She thought about the empty apartment and the sticky note and the word whatever written in blue ballpoint pen. "Where are you?" she asked. 30 minutes north of the city," he said. "A property near Lake Forest. I'll send the address to this number. If you decide to come, there will be a car waiting outside within 20 minutes. If you decide not to, I understand entirely. Either way, Miss Reeves, you do not have to spend tonight in a coffee shop." She thought about it for exactly as long as it took to finish her coffee. She texted her mother, "Do you trust him?" The reply came in less than a minute. "With my life. And yours." The car was a dark grey sedan driven by a woman named Frances, who spoke approximately 12 words during the 30-minute drive, and somehow made that feel like a kindness rather than a slight. The highway north of Chicago opened up past the last suburban sprawl, the lake invisible but present on the right side, something vast and cold pressing at the edges of the dark. The house, when it appeared at the end of a private drive, lined with oaks so old they arched overhead like a cathedral, was not what Joanna had prepared herself for. She had prepared herself for something impressive. She had not prepared herself for something genuinely beautiful. A restored Victorian estate with warm light in every window, and a front door painted the particular shade of deep blue that only very confident people chose for the outside of their homes. A man was standing on the front steps when the car stopped. Aldrich Sterling was somewhere in his mid-50s, with the kind of face that had been handsome for so long it had settled into something better, distinguished, unhurried, sharp at the eyes. He was tall, broader than his measured voice had suggested, wearing a dark sweater with the sleeves pushed to the elbows in the way of someone who had stopped caring about appearances without ever losing track of them. His hair was silver at the temples and nearly everywhere else cut close. "Mrs. Reeves." He came down 2 steps and extended his hand. "Thank you for coming. I haven't decided why I did," she said honestly, shaking it. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. "That is a fair place to start." He led her through the foyer. High ceilings, warm wood, the smell of old books, and something with rosemary from somewhere further back in the house, and into a sitting room off the main hall. A fire had been lit in the stone fireplace. 2 chairs faced it. On the low table between them, someone had placed a tea tray with an efficiency that suggested it had been prepared before her arrival. She sat, he sat. For a moment, neither of them spoke, and the fire filled the silence with something that wasn't quite comfortable but was not hostile either. "My mother said you're her employer," Joanna said. She didn't say anything about this. "I asked her not to," he said. "People make assumptions when they know the scale of things. I prefer to let the impression form on its own." "What impression would that be?" He met her eyes. His were a particular shade of grey-green, the color of the lake in November. "That I am simply a man who cares about the people who work for him, including their families." Joanna poured herself tea because it gave her hands something to do. "You called me at 10 p.m. to offer me something. What is it?" He was quiet for a moment in the way of someone who chooses words rather than reaching for them. "My household medical coordinator retired 3 months ago," he said. "She managed the health logistics for this estate, scheduling, medical appointments, liaising with specialists for my father and for 2 members of my staff who have ongoing conditions. She also served as on-call care support when needed." He paused. "I have not found a replacement I trust. Your mother told me you are an exceptional nurse, that you have been unhappy in your current position for some time, and that you may soon be in a position where a change would not simply be welcome but necessary." Joanna set down her tea. "My mother told you I'm leaving my husband. Your mother told me you were having a difficult night," he said carefully. "The rest I inferred." She looked at him for a long moment. "And what exactly are you offering?" "A position," he said. "Live in, if you choose. 3 rooms, its own entrance. Nothing like being a guest, more like a resident. Compensation above the market rate, full access to the property, and..." He stopped. Your mother's care, supervised by you, managed on terms you set, in coordination with her current specialists. I would cover her medical costs as part of the arrangement. The room was quiet except for the fire. Joanna felt something she had not felt in a long time, which was the sensation of the ground shifting in a direction that was not downward. Why? She asked. He seemed to consider how honest to be. Then he chose honesty. Because Celeste has worked for me for 18 months and not once asked for a thing she didn't earn. Because she talks about you with a pride that is, he searched for the word, piercing. And because I run a household that has, for too long, been efficient without being human. I need someone who knows how to take care of people. Not just logistics. People. Joanna thought about her mother's hands, the way they trembled over the needlework she refused to give up. She thought about the cardigan in her bag and the birthday card she had read 3 times at lunch. I need to think, she said. Of course. He rose. There is a room prepared on the 2nd floor. It is yours tonight regardless of your answer. In the morning, if you'd like a tour of the East Wing apartment, I'll show you myself. If you'd rather leave, Francis will take you wherever you need to go. He paused at the door. One more thing, Miss Reeves. He turned back, and his expression had shifted to something more direct, the professional cordiality falling away enough to reveal something genuine beneath it. You came here tonight not because you trusted me. You came because you trusted your mother. That distinction matters to me. I would like to earn the first thing in its own time. She didn't know what to say to that. She said good night instead. The room upstairs was simple and warm, with a window that faced the backyard and a reading lamp on the nightstand. Joanna sat on the edge of the bed in her grandmother's cardigan and thought about the word whatever and the word important and everything that lived between them. She slept better than she had in 2 years. She stayed. Not immediately, not without conditions. She spent 3 days at the estate before she gave her answer, and in those 3 days she asked questions that Aldrich Sterling answered without deflection. She met his father, a compact and fierce 81-year-old named Cornelius, who had survived 2 strokes and a hip replacement, and still held opinions about jazz that he shared at length with anyone who would listen. She met the 2 staff members with ongoing medical needs, a groundskeeper named Paolo who managed insulin-dependent diabetes, and a housekeeper named Mrs. Dunbar who was managing the tail end of chemotherapy for breast cancer, with a stubbornness that Joanna immediately recognized and admired. She met the household, and the household gradually met her. She also noticed other things in those 3 days. The way the gates were staffed at all hours by men who moved with the particular attentiveness of people trained for more than property management. The way certain phone calls caused Aldrich Sterling's jaw to set in a way he then deliberately relaxed. The way visitors occasionally arrived at odd hours and left with expressions she had learned, in the ear, to associate with the resolution of serious problems. On the 3rd day, she walked into the garden at dusk and found him there, standing at the far edge where the formal hedgerows gave way to a stretch of wild grass that ran down to a small private dock on the lake. He had his back to her, his hands in his pockets, and he was looking at the water, with the expression of a man who carried more than he ever talked about. She came to stand beside him without asking if she was welcome. They were quiet for a while. The lake was steel-colored in the late light, choppy with wind. Before I give you my answer, she said, I need to ask you something you might not want to tell me. He turned to look at her. Go ahead. The men at the gate, she said. The visitors, the way people in this house talk around certain things. She watched his face. What exactly do you do, Mr. Sterling? He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he breathed out slowly through his nose. Sterling Logistics, he said. Import, transport, distribution. Legitimate business, publicly traded, audited, regulated. A pause. With a private division that operates in areas governments prefer to have handled by people who do not appear in official records. Joanna kept her voice level. What kind of areas? Supply chain security, he said. Extraction of people from dangerous situations. Protection of assets that are too sensitive for conventional channels. His grey-green eyes were steady on hers. We do not traffic in anything that causes harm, Miss Reeves. That is a line I have held for 30 years and I will hold until I stop breathing. But the work is not clean. It operates in the spaces between what is legal and what is necessary, and the people who do that work require a level of discretion that most people find uncomfortable. She thought about this. And where do I fit in that? Nowhere near it, he said, asking you to be part of that world. I am asking you to be part of this house, to care for my father and my staff, and eventually your mother if she is willing to come. He paused. Those 2 things can coexist without touching each other. Can they? She asked quietly. He looked back at the lake. I have tried for a long time to keep the things I care about separate from the things I do, with varying success. He was quiet for a moment. I am telling you this because you asked. and because I will not build something on a foundation of half-truths. You deserve to know what you are walking into." Joanna stood there with the wind off the lake moving through her hair and thought about her marriage. The years of manufactured normalcy, the edited conversations, the slow erosion of herself into someone smaller and more accommodating. She thought about what it felt like to be told the whole truth even when it was complicated. It felt, she realized, like respect. "I'll take the position," she said. He turned to look at her. "But I want it in writing that my role has nothing to do with the other business," she said. "And I want my mother's care agreement separated out as its own document." She stopped. "I need you to understand that I will not pretend not to notice things. I notice things. It's the job." Something shifted in his expression then, something she hadn't seen yet. A kind of relief or recognition, as though she had answered a question he hadn't known how to ask. "I would not want you to," he said. The first months were an education. Joanna reorganized the household's medical records, set up a coordination system with Cornelius's cardiologist, arranged weekly check-ins for Paolo's endocrinologist by video when the drive became too much. She sat with Mrs. Dunbar through 2 of her remaining infusion appointments and listened to her talk about her daughter in Portland with the focused attention that was the best thing Joanna knew how to give. She brought her mother to the estate on a Thursday afternoon in November and watched Celeste's face when she saw the rooms Joanna had settled into, the reading nook, the window overlooking the garden, the small kitchen where Joanna made coffee every morning before anyone else was awake. Her mother took her hand and held it for a moment without speaking, and that said everything. Celeste did not move in. She was too independent for that, and Joanna respected it. But she came twice a week, and Aldrich Sterling had arranged for a neurologist 30 minutes away who was, her mother reported with something like wonder, actually listening to me. Joanna and Aldrich Sterling fell into a pattern without designing one. Breakfast in the kitchen when schedules aligned. Evening walks when the weather allowed. Conversations that started with Cornelius's latest lab results or Paolo's glucose trends and gradually became something else. His childhood in Edinburgh, her years in nursing school, the particular texture of grief that comes from watching someone you love lose their steadiness 1 degree at a time. She learned things about him that his household already knew and his business world didn't, that he read history obsessively and argued with biographies in the margins, that he had a sister in Auckland he called every Sunday without fail, that he had been married once, briefly in his 30s, to a woman he described as brilliant and entirely wrong for him, and that he had not let anyone close in the 20 years since with the single-minded focus of someone who had decided solitude was safer than risk. He learned things about her, that she cried exactly once when things were very bad and then did not again for a long time, that she kept a plant alive on her windowsill that had survived 3 apartments and a marriage, which he considered one of her significant achievements, that she was funny, quietly and precisely, in the way of people who grew up understanding that humor was a form of armor. She did not fall in love with him quickly. It happened the way most real things happen, so gradually that by the time she could name it, it had already been true for some time. The moment she could name it was a Tuesday in February, 8 months after she arrived. Cornelius had been having a difficult week, and Joanna had spent 2 nights in the main house monitoring him closely. On the 3rd night, when his vitals stabilized and the crisis passed, she found Aldrich Sterling in the kitchen at 2 a.m. making tea with the focused incompetence of a man who had spent his life having other people make his tea. He looked up when she came in. "How is he?" he asked. "Stable," she said. "Sleeping. Better." He let out a breath that had been held for 3 days. And then, unexpectedly, he sat down heavily at the kitchen table and put his face in his hands for just a moment. Just one moment, human and unguarded, before he put himself back together. Joanna sat down across from him and did not look away. She did not say anything reassuring. She just stayed. After a while, he looked up. His eyes were tired and a little raw. "Thank you. For all of it. It's my job," she said. "It is not your job," he said quietly. "To sit with me at 2 a.m. in a kitchen and make the dark feel smaller." She thought about that for a long moment. "No," she said. "That part's something else." He looked at her, and the kitchen was very quiet. What she did not know was that something was gathering outside the warmth of that February kitchen. Derek, her ex-husband, the divorce had finalized in January, cleanly and without drama. A kind of relief she had not expected to feel as purely as she did, had begun to ask questions. Not from heartbreak. Derek was not the type to grieve. He was the type to feel wronged when something he had not valued was no longer available to him. He had found out, through the mutual friend networks that Chicago maintained like a social circulatory system, that Joanna was living on the Sterling estate. He had decided this meant something. He could not imagine what she offered that made her worth having, but he could imagine, very easily, what living at Aldrich Sterling's address was worth. He had made contact with someone at the city assessor's office. He had made contact with an investigative reporter who had been building a file on Sterling Logistics for 3 years. He had made contact, in a phone call Joanna did not know about for several weeks, with a man named Rourke who operated in the margins of the city in ways that made him useful to people who needed leverage. Aldrich Sterling knew about all of it within 48 hours. He told her on a Sunday evening in the sitting room where they had first spoken, the fire going, the tea tray between them. He told her everything. The contacts Derek had made, the reporter's angle, the questions about whether she could be pressured to provide information about the household. Joanna listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "What does this put at risk?" she asked. "My business interests," he said. "Some ongoing operations, potentially several people who depend on this house for their security." He paused. "And you. If Derek decides coercion is useful, he won't," she said with a certainty that surprised both of them. "Derek doesn't have the follow-through for coercion. He's performing outrage. It's what he does." She looked at Aldrich. "What are you going to do?" "I have several options." His voice was measured the way it got when he was working through something he'd already thought about from multiple angles. "The cleanest resolution is a conversation with Derek that clarifies what his continued interest in this household will cost him. Not a threat, a business conversation." She studied him. "Have you already had it?" A pause. "I have made arrangements for it to happen this week." She nodded slowly. "And the reporter?" "The reporter has a story about corporate irregularities in shipping contracts from 4 years ago," Aldrich said, "which are real and which I have already voluntarily disclosed to the appropriate federal oversight body as part of an ongoing cooperation agreement." He met her eyes. "The story she wants does not exist. The story that does exist has me on the right side of it." Joanna thought about this. "You've been 3 steps ahead the whole time?" "It is how I survive," he said simply. She was quiet for a long moment, looking at the fire. "You could have not told me any of this." "Yes," he said. "Why did you?" He looked at her directly, the grey-green eyes that she had learned to read over months of careful attention. "Because you told me on the first night that you do not pretend not to notice things," he said. "And because I promised you a foundation that was not built on half-truths." Something settled in her chest, something she had spent most of her adult life looking for without knowing the shape of it. "All right," she said. "Then we deal with it." He looked at her for a moment. We, she said. Derek arrived at the gate on a Wednesday morning without calling ahead, which told Joanna everything she needed to know about how he expected it to go. He was let in. She had anticipated this, had asked for it, and brought to the garden room where she waited for him alone. He came in with the particular swagger of a man who had prepared for a confrontation and was confident he held the higher ground. He took in the room, the grounds visible through the glass, the deliberate quiet of the house, and she watched him recalibrate. "You look comfortable," he said, with the tone he used when he meant something else. "I am," she said simply. She did not offer him a seat. He stood in the middle of the room, some of his confidence draining into the Persian rug. "I've been talking to some people," he started. "I know," she said. "Aldrich told me." His face shifted. This is really happening." "You and the old man." She kept her voice even, the nurse voice, the one that did not rise or waver. "I am going to say this once. I am not a pressure point. I am not leverage. I am not a way to get to him or to this house or to any of the things you think you can use." She held his gaze. "I understand that it's difficult to accept that I left because I was unhappy and not because I wanted something from someone else. But that is the truth, and I need you to hear it." He opened his mouth. "And if you continue to make contact with people who are looking for ways to cause damage here," she said quietly, "I will provide my attorney with the documentation of those contacts, and you will spend a very expensive year explaining to your employer why you were meeting with men like Rourke." She paused. "I kept receipts, Derek. It is what I do." The room was very still. He left 20 minutes later, and the swagger was gone on the way out. Aldrich Sterling appeared in the doorway of the garden room 30 seconds after the gate closed. He had not been in the room, but she had known he was close. "How did you know about Rourke by name?" he asked. "Francis mentioned it," she said. "Francis tells me things. Something crossed his face that might have been awe, and then something warmer than that. You handled that entirely on your own." "I've been handling things on my own for a long time," she said. "The difference now is I don't have to." He crossed the room in 3 steps and took both her hands in his, which was the most he had allowed himself since February, since the kitchen at 2 a.m., since all the careful distance they had been maintaining around something that was already true. "Joanna," he said, and the way he said her name was different. Not the professional courtesy of the first months, not the warmth of the in-between months, but something direct and vulnerable and entirely his own. I have spent 20 years deciding that certain things were not available to me anymore, that I had used up whatever capacity I had for. This, she looked up at him. I was wrong, he said simply. She stepped forward and let the distance close. Yes, she said, you were. Spring came back to Lake Forest the way spring always came back, insisting on itself despite all evidence that it couldn't possibly. The oaks at the end of the drive put out their first tentative leaves in April, and by May the formal garden was a riot of color that Mrs. Dunbar, in remission and unstoppable, supervised with considerable personal investment. Celeste came on a Tuesday and found her daughter sitting on a bench at the far edge of the garden with Aldrich Sterling beside her, both of them reading different books in a companionable silence that said more than any conversation she might have interrupted. Celeste stood at the edge of the path for a moment and watched her daughter's face in repose. The ease in it, the absence of the vigilance that had been there for so long. Celeste had forgotten what her face looked like without it. She turned around quietly and let herself back inside without disturbing them. Later she would tell her daughter, "You stopped holding your breath." I could see it from 30 feet away. Cornelius Sterling, who had survived 2 strokes and a hip replacement and had opinions about jazz and, also as it turned out about everything else, pulled Joanna aside at a Sunday dinner that spring and said, with the directness of a man who had outlived the patience for circumlocution, "My son has been a stone for 20 years. Don't let him go back to that," she said. "I don't intend to." He nodded, apparently satisfied. "You'll do," he said, which from Cornelius was something close to a standing ovation. There was a dinner in May, a formal one, at the estate. 12 people at the long table in the dining room with the crystal and the silver and the candles going soft as the evening wound down. Joanna sat at one end and Aldrich at the other. The way she had learned things were arranged when he wanted her there as a genuine presence, rather than a guest. Cornelius was on her left, engaged in a sustained argument with a city council member about infrastructure funding. Mrs. Dunbar was there, her hair growing back in soft curls, laughing at something Paolo's wife had said. Joanna looked down the length of the table at the man at the other end. He was listening to someone with his full attention, the way he always listened. But he glanced up at the same moment she looked, and for a second it was just that, a look across a table, unremarkable in every way except that it said something neither of them had found the words for yet, and both of them understood perfectly. After the guests had gone and the house had settled into its nighttime quiet, they walked out to the dock at the edge of the lake. The water was dark and the stars were very clear, and the city to the south was aglow on the horizon that looked, from here, like a gentle thing. He put his arm around her and she leaned into him, and they stood there without speaking for a long time. "I asked your mother something," he said finally. She looked up at him, "Last Tuesday when she was here." He reached into his jacket pocket. "I asked her permission because she is the person whose opinion on the subject matters most." In his hand was a ring, simple, antique, a single oval stone set in old gold, the kind of thing that had been worn before and carried history in the metal. "She said yes before I finished the sentence," he said. There was something in his voice that she had never heard from him, a kind of undisguised joy, uncertain at the edges, like a man who has stopped protecting himself and found the world on the other side of it to be more than he expected. "Joanna, I have built walls around the things I care about for so long that I forgot there was a difference between protection and isolation." He looked at her. "You walked through every wall I had without ever breaking one. You just—" He stopped. "You made them unnecessary." She felt tears on her face without having been aware they started. "Ask me," she said. "Will you marry me?" "Yes," she said, without a single hesitation, without a single doubt. "Yes. Obviously, yes." He laughed, actual and surprised, the laugh she had been coaxing out of him since February, and he put the ring on her finger and it fit as though it had been sized for her, and she suspected, knowing him, that it had. She pressed her face against his shoulder and felt his heartbeat, steady and real, and the lake went on in the dark, indifferent and enormous, and none of that touched them at all. 3 years later, Joanna Sterling stood in the kitchen of the Lake Forest estate on a Saturday morning while her daughter sat on the counter eating a banana and offering opinions on everything. Nora Sterling was 2.5 and had her mother's dark eyes and her father's extraordinary confidence about her own preferences. She was currently informing Joanna that bananas were better broken than cut, and that the dog, a retired greyhound named Captain, Cornelius's most recent acquisition, should be allowed inside regardless of what anyone had said about Muddy Paws. Aldrich came into the kitchen with the newspaper and the look he always had on Saturday mornings, unhurried in a way that weekdays didn't allow. He lifted Nora off the counter without breaking stride, settled her on his hip, and she allowed this because she had determined he was useful. "Your mother's coming Tuesday," he said to Joanna. "I know." She poured him coffee. "Cornelius wants to show her the new jazz record he found. He's been planning it for 2 weeks. He practiced what he was going to say about it." "I know," she said again, smiling. He came to where she was standing and put his free hand against her face, tipping her chin up. Nora watched this with the frank assessment of a child determining whether it required her intervention. "You are happy," he said, not a question. She thought about a kitchen in October, a sticky note on a refrigerator, a birthday with no one in it. She thought about a woman sitting alone in a coffee shop on Wabash with a bag over her shoulder, and the slow, terrifying, necessary decisions to stop holding on to something that had never held her. She thought about how the path from that woman to this one had looked, from the inside, like collapse, and had turned out, in the end, to be something else entirely. "I am," she said, "more than I have words for." He kissed her, and Nora made a sound of profound exasperation at the unnecessary drama of adults, and outside the kitchen window the April light was doing what April light always does, arriving without apology, warm and absolutely certain of itself.